a brown Latina woman in her 20s. I have dark brunette hair and I am wearing a gold/yellow shirt with a black cardigan. And then my background is a blue and white background with the Yo Disabled and Proud logo, as well as an image of our guest speaker, Al-Mohamed. So yeah, now let's get started with our Zoom accessibility basics. We'll start with captioning. If you go onto the bottom of the page in the Zoom toolbar and you click CC, that exists for closed caption button. And if you select show subtitles, it would be able to show you all the captioning as we go throughout like the whole event. In addition, you'll provide the stream text link within the chat so you could be able to follow along. Moreover, today we have two amazing ASL interpreters who are here with us today to be of assistance. So thank you very much. And next.
Also in that toolbar for the meeting functions, you can send questions using the Q&A button. You can raise your hand using the raise hand function if it's more accessible and we can unmute you to ask your question. Or if you need technical support or want to say anything else about the program we have presented to you today, you can use the chat button, which is also in that bottom toolbar.
Now let's quickly talk about our Disabled Voices of Color Speaker Series. This series is the monthly installment that we have from January through December. We invite disability activists to speak about their advocacy within the community and how the youth can get involved. We have had amazing speakers such as Mia Mingus, Ryan Easterly, and Nikki Brown Booker, who have been with us these past few months and talked about their own individual experiences. Next.
If you would like to follow or keep up with the Disability Belongs podcast, you can do so at disability_belongs_podcast on Instagram. And actually a new episode was just posted if you would like to give that a listen. Next.
Now we wanted to take the time to tell you a little bit about some of the projects we are working on. One of them includes the Yo COVID-19 outreach campaign. Yo Disabled and Proud and our friends at Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, better known as STRATF, and Rooted in Rights are recruiting and organizing disabled youth to increase vaccination rates within our community. If you are a youth between the ages of 14 to 22 who wants to get involved in this important work, please let us know. We are looking for disabled youth in California who want to share their COVID-19 vaccine stories. We are asking that youth who want to participate to send us a selfie and quote on why the COVID-19 vaccine was meaningful to you. Please email social media at cfioc.org if you're interested or have any questions about the project. We look forward to working with you. Next.
If you would like to follow Yo Disabled and Proud on social media, you can do so by following our Twitter, that's at Yo Disabled Proud. Our Instagram is at Yo Disabled and Proud. And our TikTok is at Yo Disabled and Proud. And those links will also be in the chat if you would like to follow us on social media.
Now, a really quick special thing that we are doing today is we're doing a special giveaway. Our team is excited to conduct a giveaway raffle. 2 individuals will win the opportunity to select one free item from the Yo store. We will be drawing the winners at random at the end of our event. You must be present to win that special giveaway. So good luck.
Before we begin, we wanted to take a minute to say thank you to the amazing people both on screen and behind the scenes. We wanted to thank our mentors from CFILC for sharing their wisdom and expertise assisting with this event. Our guest, Al-Mohamed, for taking time out of her busy day to speak to us about her life as an advocate, her wisdom as a leader, and how we can help carry out her message. And finally, our amazing ASL interpreters and captioners for providing access needs to you. Day is an author, filmmaker, and radio host. Day recently started a new position as the Director of Disability Policy at the White House. And prior to that, she worked at the U.S. Department of Labor, where she led the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's Premier Safety and Health Management Recognition Program, the Voluntary Protection Programs. Day is a founding member of FWD-Doc, which is an organization for documentary filmmakers with disabilities, and sits on the board of Docs in Progress. Day also managed the American Psychological Association's legislative and regulatory activities related to disability, healthcare, immigration, and international development. So, hi Day, welcome to Yo Disabled and Proud's fourth Disabled Voices of Color speaker series. If we could have you come on.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for coming. So this series is a way for us to connect with disabled youth on critical topics like intersectionality, ableism, and disability justice, because these continue to be hot topics among disabled youth. Intentionally making space to bring in disabled leaders of color like yourself and spotlighting the magnificent work you are doing on behalf of our community is one of the ways we chose to educate and build leadership skills of disabled youth. We really appreciate you sharing some of your time with us today, and we'd like to start our interviews with a simple question that is often overlooked. The last couple years have highlighted for us what we need as a community and how important check-ins have been. With that being said, how are you doing and how are you feeling as a disabled woman living through a pandemic?
Yeah, you don't start with an easy question, do you? All right, so let me actually start real simply. So my name is Al-Mohamed. I'm a Bahraini American woman, so I have medium brown skin. I've got black hair. I've got a lovely gray streak started down the front. I'm a black turtleneck, and I actually have a new necklace that my wife got me, I love it. It's a model of like a little tiny reindeer skull that's actually made by a lovely woman up in Baltimore. My pronouns are she, her, and I am coming to you from the lands of the Piscataway, the Pamunkey, and the Anacostan, also known as Washington, D.C. As for how I am, for me as an individual, I am doing surprisingly well. Got some long hours most recently with the switch to the new job. But like everyone else, it's kind of one of the things we still operate under a pandemic. And so there's this layer, I think, that everyone is dealing with. And so I want to kind of acknowledge that as a part of how we live now in many ways, both good and bad. But other than that, I will repeat, I'm thrilled to be here. And I'll be honest, you guys are my first actual presentation that I have done as the Director of Disability Policy at the White House. So congratulations, you are number one.
Thank you.
All right. Well, to begin with, we are very honored to be your number one. It's really exciting, especially because for us, a lot of these things are very important to delve into, seeing that we really want to go more towards talking about disability justice and its intersectionality with disability rights. So going with that, our second question would be, well, first we want to congratulate you on your new position as the Director of Disability Policy at the White House. Can you share with us the kind of work you are currently doing and the work you have done in the past? In addition to that, how has it helped shape the way you talk about disability justice and what the future should look like for youth in the disability community?
Sure. That is a long question, and I may have to ask you to repeat parts of it because I'll be honest, just executive function wise, I occasionally will miss something. So, but we're all in a good space here together. So I am very proud and honored to be a part of this administration. I know the Biden-Harris administration made a lot of campaign promises and made a lot of commitments toward the disability community. And I know one of the things the president's been really big on within this first year was an equity agenda, and disability has been a key part of that equity. And my own work here is actually under the racial justice and equity team. So what's really nice is to be able to see all of my identity pieces, right? As an immigrant, as a woman of color, as a person with a disability, all being able to have all of that respected, and actually be able to bring all of that into the work that is done. So promoting that equity agenda, and we'll see that in work that's done with education, things that are being done with HHS, things that came out of the Investment Infrastructure Act, and also parts of it that are key that were in the American Rescue Plan. So at least just even getting started, is thrilled to be able to push that part of it. In many ways, it's kind of a continuation of a lot of the work that I did previously, both within the federal government and outside, which is the idea of making sure that disability has a voice, right? We're all here and we're all speaking. And part of it is, what does it take to get people to listen, to recognize that we are not a community that can be done into, that we do have our own ideas and solutions that actually may work well and may work better. And I think it's tough in some ways also, right? This is a people of color series. So we're also talking about that intersectional element. And historically, the way we have talked about disability does not acknowledge that other communities and communities of color may experience disability differently, may identify disability differently, and may have different kinds of community goals around disability that differ. So even the way we talk about it hasn't necessarily been geared in the best way. And I'm excited to see some of that. Maybe it's not ready to start changing, but at least there is a recognition of these different experiences. And we see it showing up in places like the way data collection happens. We're seeing it in places around policing, which traditionally has had very much a racialized experience. And we're being able to say, no, this is disability too. So I think that's me catching part of your question. And I'm so sorry if you could repeat the other part of what you wanted.
No, for sure. And well, before that, I really did want to take the time to also thank you for being able to talk about a lot of the intersectionalities. I know, for example, right now, I am doing a lot of collaborative work with disability justice in the sense of immigrant ground and its intersectionality with disability rights. And for me, that is something that's also very personal because I do come from an immigrant background. So I think it's also very crucial for us to be understanding and accepting of within this community, seeing that it involves everyone. When it comes to disability does not discriminate against anyone. So it's so crucial to understand that we are all affected in more ways than one. And we have many folks that are part of this community. So going with that, part of the second question kind of had to do, how has it shaped the way you talk about disability justice and what the future should look like for youth in the within the disabled community?
Sure. So I'll be honest, I'm an older person here, so I still get caught up in the language of disability rights. And I'm seeing a lot of younger folks talking about is around the idea of disability justice, which in many ways I think addresses equity more broadly, and definitely has a much more anti-capitalist standpoint than maybe what I'm familiar with. And that's just me being honest and upfront about where I am, which is also where I'm also constantly learning and struggling, because like all of us, we grow up in the systems and institutions and structures that are around us, which means we will have some of those same kinds of biases. And so a lot of it is looking at, all right, who are folks who are able to kind of break out of those? And some of it's like, what are ways we can follow some of those ideas? And some of them may or may not, the world may not be, the country may not be ready for yet, but sometimes I think we need that bit of a push and the recognition that things can and should change, which is part of the reason I'm actually very much buoyed by the push towards disability justice, even as as an adult, am struggling to make sure I can follow those tenets. Wow, and I forgot the question. So, but I think I wanted to highlight that kind of difference. And I think that's one of the things I think that is important. I think for a lot of young folks going forward is recognizing, one, that difference, but also looking at where you want to go. I over the years, I've met many young folks, and I've worked with many interns, including interns with disabilities, as well as from other identities, because I like to mentor across multiple communities. And one of the things that people talk to me is about what kind of disability advocacy they want to do later on. And the counterintuitive thing that I always tell people is, don't do disability advocacy. Do the advocacy that moves you, whether that is education, whether that is housing, technology, the arts. Take your desire for equity to those places, because there aren't that many jobs that actually have disability in the title, right? There are fewer of those. But whatever you are passionate about in housing, you have a disability. You're a person of color. Wherever you go, you will take that with you and you will make change there. And I think that's one of the biggest things to push is we are so much more than any individual identity. So find that arena you want to operate in, whether that is policy, that is the arts, that is business, it doesn't matter, but just take that with you and drive change in those systems. Because as I alluded to earlier, we grow up in institutions and systems, and those are the things that need to be changed. We want to talk about changing people, but systems are also built with inequities in them. And that requires a knowledge that is inside. And so if you have that banking expertise, banking and investment expertise, then you can look at how laws, policies, systems, and programs in banking might be disequitable. And then you have the knowledge to change that. Why? Based on who you are. There's a power in that. So in many ways, like I said, that's my counterintuitive advice is go where that interest is. You will take all of you with it, and you can use that.
No, yeah. Like, I totally get that. Like, honestly, I feel that a lot of like who we are as individuals, our personal stories, like our identities define very much the work that we do and who we are as individuals. So I truly feel that like the realm that we would want to enter, we're already creating a change because we have like a legacy of like folks that have built the way for us to be where we are, to be able to create constructive change that would benefit us and like the different community groups and identities that we represent. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Okay. Just a reminder, everyone, we want to give you a chance for Day to answer your questions. So you can use the Q&A button if you would like, to ask a question today. But so I'm going to ask a question. Like, you're obviously like a phenomenal storyteller. Like in Fresno, I do this like youth journalism thing. And the point that the adult mentors like really stress is like that, like our identities as a youth and like the other spaces that we occupy are so critical in, the way that we tell stories, and that our voices are important because like we're coming from like all of these different spaces, and the way that we all tell stories is going to be influenced that. So my question is, how have your identities influenced the way that you tell stories, or have they motivated you to tell stories that are often overlooked by society?
Sure. So So let me clarify. I wear a lot of hats. So currently, my day job is as somebody who works in disability policy. Outside of that, as mentioned earlier, I'm an author and I'm a filmmaker, and so I love storytelling. You can write a law that says "Thou shalt not discriminate," right? But that the law is this really cold and inflexible thing, and it's very hard, because it has to be enforced on people. But if you can change culture, if you can change the way people think about things, then it's not, then they'll make change and they will follow the law, not because it's a law that's enforced on them, but because they have ingrained the idea that it's the right thing to do. That accessibility, as a good example, is the right thing to do. And one of the best ways to change culture is storytelling. And I'm a big proponent of film insofar as, guess what? Like, everybody watches film. If you say, because it's coming out, "May the force be with you," everyone knows pretty much what you're talking about, and so what you can do through film is to basically try and influence that kind of cultural element. So for me, I love history, and filmmaking for me was a way to express that history. Why? Because nobody wants to read a history book. But if I can make it something exciting and fun to watch, then maybe people will do that. And for me, a big element is disability history, right? If you mention famous people in disability history, just to the general public, you'll get 3 people. You'll probably get Helen Keller, FDR, and Stevie Wonder. And you may not even get Stevie Wonder for that, but they are the holy trinity of disability history, because that's all people think about. Even within our own community, we'll talk about some of the advocates from like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but our history doesn't go back further than that. We're missing part of our own cultural history and our own cultural legacy. And so I wanted to kind of find a way to capture that and share that, because it's not just about us and who we are as advocates, but it's about the accomplishments and the fact that we were there. We existed. We not only just existed, we thrived. And we didn't just thrive. We are drivers and changers of society as much as anyone else. And that has been erased. And we've seen this same reclamation of history around women's history, where we're talking about, hey, look at all these women who made a difference, around the influences of people of color. Look at what folks have done. So why not disability? And so my very first film was called The Invalid Corps. And it was set in the Civil War, because nobody wants to watch another Civil War film. Even I didn't. At the same time, it was this idea that we all think we know the story of the Civil War, right? 500,000, young men killed, the United States torn in half, tens of thousands of people injured, 40,000 amputations. The question is, all of that, about all the death and all the injuries, nobody ever asked what happened to those men afterwards, right? The idea was, well, didn't they just go home? And the answer is no, they didn't. The U.S. Army was so desperate for manpower, they actually created several units made up of these men with disabilities. And the thing is, these men, they guarded railroads, they guarded prisons, they operated as police in the Washington, D.C. area under Provost Marshall. They worked in hospitals. They did clerking jobs. Basically, they did a lot of this backbone work. And in one case, this is the summer of 1864. It's towards the end of the war, and General Grant has pushed the Confederates all the way down to Richmond, right? And basically they're squeezing. This is close to the end of the war, and so Robert E. Lee sends Jubal Early, one of his generals, and he says, "I want you to go north, and I want you to cause as much trouble as you can along the way. If you can get to Washington, go for it." Now, the thing is, he had pulled so many men out of the north, there was nobody to stop Early. So this man went up and around, across Virginia, up and around Maryland, and suddenly he is 3 miles away from Washington, D.C. He is about to take the Union capital, here at the end of the war. And here's the thing. The only thing between him and the Capitol was this tiny little fort called Fort Stevens. And it was manned by a few, what they called 100 days men, guys who came in, I'm just coming in for 100 days. And basically, as they called it, a bunch of air quotes here, cripples in the Invalid Corps. And the Invalid Corps guys held out for 24 hours up against these like 20,000 Confederate soldiers until reinforcements could be sent up the river. So, and here's the key thing. President Lincoln himself was on the ramparts of Fort Stevens at the time. So basically, it is a bunch of disabled folk who helped defend Washington, D.C. and helped keep the Union from falling in Confederate hands. And I'm like, but this entire story, is not in history books. This entire story about what these guys with disabilities did is not something, there's not a monument, there's not a memorial, there's not even a footnote. And so for me, being able to put that out there in the world and say, look, we are here, we exist, and by God, what have we done? Was super important. And then what was great was the reenactors responded, the historians responded. They're like, this is fantastic. Why haven't we heard about this? Our own community is like, this is us. This is great. Wait, is there more? And what's lovely is that I was able to talk to PBS and specifically American Masters, who said, you know what, we are missing this community. And I said, I'd like to do a series, just a short video series. Let's talk about amazing folks with disabilities who you've never heard of. And they said, let's do it. And so they actually paid for us to create a pilot. And granted, I'll be honest, we're still looking for funding for the rest of the series, but we built a pilot, and it's called Renegades, because I wasn't allowed to use the term badass. So I can't have you badasses with disabilities, but it's called Renegades. And the first story is about Kitty O'Neill, who is a famous woman stunt driver and speed racer of the 1970s. She was the stunt double for both Linda Carter and Lindsay Wagner. So basically, this woman who was deaf was both the Bionic Woman and Wonder Woman. And I'm like, how have we not heard of her? This is amazing. And up until 2019, up until 2019, she held the women's land speed record. She was the fastest woman in the world. It was only broken in 2019 by Jessie Combs, who some of you may recognize who is a Mythbuster, who unfortunately died in the attempt. But she held that record. And here's the thing. I say she held the women's land speed record. Here's the thing. She got in the car and this dragster in the Alford Desert in Oregon. And on that first run, she blasted down and back, because you have to do 2 runs, then you do the average. She beat the old record by I want to say several hundred miles an hour. She was this close to beating the men's record. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. You blew past the women's record. So they were going to come back tomorrow. The second day, they pulled her from the car because they said it would be terrible to have a woman beat the men's record. They said it would be terrible to have a deaf person beat the man's record. Sorry, so it was to beat a man's record. So she only held the women's record, and she sued to try to do that, but she never got a chance to see that. And that's the kind of examples I want to give. I want to talk about folks who are absolutely incredible that everybody should know about. Sorry, so that's a very long answer. But you can see what I'm talking, for me in particular, I'm talking about history, but let's talk about modern films. Let's talk about TV series, and let's talk about science fiction. We shouldn't exist in I want to, bring up and lift up our history in the past, but let's talk about what we're doing now. And let's talk about science fiction and fantasy, science fiction books and movies, because guess what? We should exist in the future too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, sorry. I was on your website and I was like reading about the Civil War documentary, and I was like, yeah, like that's really, I don't know, because I mean, obviously I've gone through the American public school system. Like we go to like Civil War reenactments where they like reenact like the amputations, and they're like, oh my God, they're biting on bullets because they're in so much pain. And you're like, wow, that's really terrible. But you never think about like what happens like afterwards, and like how these people like, how like wars and stuff are like, major disabling events, and like people come back with like, their abilities like drastically changed. And yeah, so it really made me think. So that's just my comment.
Yeah, it's if you take a look at when our major policies and laws are written around disability, many of them take place right after major wars. Right, our first pension system started to take. I mean, there was one after the Revolutionary War, but the first real disability pension system came after the Civil War, and it was for Civil War veterans. When we talk about big changes in rehabilitation and those laws, it came after World War II. So we see a lot of those kinds of changes take place. Some of the first work-based systems came after World War I. And so what it is you'll see those kinds of changes take place because they're major disabling events.
Yeah. Like, honestly, it's very fascinating to know like everything that you have done, because like you have done a bit of everything. So like such like as the history, I think it's so very much important, as Sophia said. I think that also, well, I mean, that delves into another issue within itself when it comes towards how history is being written and like how much history is being taught, like actual history that is happening, because like more often than not, we hear how like stories are always written by the victor, but we don't get like the fallout of like everything that like occurred after, or just like more about like the history that happened within. So like being able to delve more into that portion, I am very appreciative of that, just because it makes me feel like I am getting a better understanding of like folks that have helped build this country be what it is. With that, we'll go into like the last question before we enter the Q&A section. And the last question would be, in your opinion, how can diverse youth groups come together to express the intersectionalities of our lives and identities without being ableist, but instead creating a more inclusive space?
You know what? I don't have the answer. And anybody who tells you they do, I'm going to call a liar, because I think we're still learning, and we're still struggling, and we're going to get it wrong. And I think if we're going to talk about how groups can do it, I think is to learn to fail with grace, and to be able to say, you know what, we messed this up. We're going to try and fix it. We didn't quite get this right. We're going to try and make it work. Or we have conflicting access needs. Let's see if we can find a way to make this work for as many people as possible. Because it's hard. And when you have, let's try two different. Let me give a couple of concrete examples. I just hosted a meeting, and it was a working meeting with multiple groups. And I learned that the Zoom that we were using, because my personal one automatically enables captions, this one did not. And there's that real moment of, do I cancel the meeting and reset it? And I'm like, I can't do that. There's too many people. It took too much to get them together. So I had to take a moment, and I said, I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to apologize right now, because one, I should have confirmed this. Two, no, that we do not have captioning, and we don't. So I'll apologize to folks. I will make, I won't repeat the curse words I said there, that we do have it next time. And in the interim, what I can do is make sure that we have the notes from this, and we will make it short and simple. That way we can still move forward, and then we'll meet. And some might argue you should scrap the meeting and reset. Some might say you did just fine. But for me, the key point was we're still going to move forward. So we have the groups come together. But I think that personal acknowledgement and recognition that this is not okay makes a big difference. And I'm currently in meetings with a bunch of folks who go, how can we fix this? The other thing is, sometimes it takes going after folks multiple times. If you have a disability group, and let's say a racial justice group that you're trying to get to work together, neither have very good history of and knowledge of each other. And so when you're trying to make those initial inroads, you might have a couple of people on each side who are really enthusiastic, but don't forget, you are trying to, this is that institutional movement we're talking about, where you're trying to get it ingrained into each group to recognize the needs, desires, and goals of the other. And that takes time, which means one side and or the other is going to screw it up. One side or the other is going to be like, I've got my priorities. I don't have time for this. And being able to keep going back and saying, no, we all need to keep doing this and try to make sure that it goes both directions. So I think that's the hard thing is to remember we are in it for the long game. And that means there are things that will go wrong. And that means things may not be perfect, but we have to try and always keep pushing for some sort of progress. And there'll be days where you go, I'm done. I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to walk away. And if you need to do that, that is okay too. Find a place where you can push that progress and just tell other folks, I need you to carry the water for this on me. I didn't phrase that right, but I think my point was clear. And being able to work it that way. So I think honestly, that would be my advice would be finding groups that have some shared values, because you're not going to have the same shared values or you'd be the same group, right? And figuring out how you can collaborate. And sometimes it might be as simple as going, let's start with one small initiative or one small event that we can do together. Because that way you have a project in common with a beginning and an end date, right? Because that lets you start that kind of conversation and then kind of build from there. But I think part of it is that recognition that, you know what, we're all going to fail and we're all going to have to learn and grow from it. Because the alternative of not growing is you're going to stagnate. Nobody wants that.
For sure. That sounds very knowledgeable. I think it's very crucial to be able to understand that, the whole process we have to follow in order to get back up again, and being able to make mistakes and being able to learn from them. Just because, as you mentioned, this is a long process when it comes towards, in general, justice in all realms, whether that being race, without that being disability amongst different identities. These are all long battles that are not going to be necessarily accomplished by tomorrow. So it's going to be very important towards being able to have those open dialogues and conversations, so we can start identifying the intersections amongst different identities and how we could be able to work around them, and being able to see how we could move forward, while at the same time being able to show our support towards one another in all realms, because at the end of it, we're all just trying to grow and become better and create a more inclusive and equitable space towards our communities. And with that, I'll pass it to Sophia to ask the first Q&A question.
Laura says, I'd be interested in your thoughts on disabled folks who do not embody queer or racialized or other intersectional identities, saying they are engaged in disability justice or using the term.
I think it takes everybody to move the ship, so I am fine with folks saying they want to be engaged, they're engaged in racial justice. And I'm real big on the recognize that you come with some privilege, and recognize also how can you also help elevate and lift up and amplify other voices. So that actually would be my biggest one, would be looking at doing that. I have a lot of educational and financial privilege, a lot. Right. I have a law degree. I live in Washington, D.C. I have a lovely home, and there are a lot of folks who do not have that. And I am well aware of what a difference that makes. It allows me not to just have a job, but also the time and the energy to put towards filmmaking is an expensive activity. And I'm well aware, that is part of what allowed me to do that. But that's also why I also work very hard, in my film work as far as hiring. Like right now, the PBS Renegade series currently is more than 50% folks with disabilities in front of and behind the camera. Is also more than 50% people of color. And actually the entire core executive team on that film production are all women. And that was a conscious decision that I made because I wanted to basically put my money where my mouth is and actually walk the walk. And I'll be honest, my executive producer on that series is a white woman who I will say has asked some questions that are probably not the most politically correct, but they were done with an open heart and an honest tongue and an effort to do better. And I am always willing to support allies who are willing to also walk the walk. And she was 100% in when and pushed me also to see what we could do to up our hiring so it could be even more diverse. So I think I'm all in. It'll take everybody to turn the ship.
Thank you. And our second question would come from Cameron Mitchell. And Cameron said, can you tell us more about your work as an author and your creative process when writing characters with disabilities? And Cameron put, for instance, where did you draw inspiration for Baba Ali and the Clockwork Djinn, a steampunk fairy tale?
Sure. So I started my creative work writing. And I, like many people who started writing who have disabilities, and some of you may not, but many who I've spoken to, when they started writing, they did not include characters with disabilities in their writing. There's that, is that going to sell? Is that going to work? And I'll admit, a lot of my early stories did not. This book has one or two characters with disabilities, but in general, it does not. But it does include, it is a Middle Eastern story with a Muslim protagonist, and it is actually a retelling of Baba Ali and the 40 Thieves. And again, you hear this nerdery about me and fairy tales and history and wanting to put it. It's actually set in the 1800s. So in a world where we see a rise of steam as the major form of technology rather than electricity. So my process for storytelling comes from probably two ways. One is I will find a story or a history or an event, something that I think is cool or awesome. And then you start to craft from that, right? It's like when people talk about science fiction, it's a kind of a what if. And this kind of steampunk stories is also a what if. And I'm going to retell this fairy tale, but instead of using the Baba Ali and the 40 Thieves, which most people are familiar with, and the Disney one is based on, which is a Burton translation, I want to go back to some of the older stories and the older folklore, which actually involved, and I'll be honest, at the time it was, depending on the translation, of the servant girl or the slave girl, Morgiana. And in some parts of the Middle East, it's called Clever Morgiana because she actually had a bigger role in the story than Ali Baba did. And so we brought her in as the story and wanted to lift up her tale as a part of that and make it a little bit of a romantic story. So it's one where I started with an outline of a structure that already existed because we used Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. We put it in a specific time period. And then it was kind of, how do you want to change the tale? The other way I like to start stories is start with a character. Is it a personality or someone that you find fascinating and you drop them into an interesting situation and then you see what happens. When it comes to writing characters with disabilities, I think I'm now slowly at that point where I'm starting to include them more. And that is a personal comfort level thing. And I think we'll all find ourselves in different places with that. And that was more recently, which is the Labyrinth's Archivist, where I decided I needed to get over my own internal ableism. And I'm like, I'm going to write a story. And actually, and this is what I said to the publisher in the paragraph, I want to write a murder mystery in a fantasy setting. And our main character, she is a blind woman of color who happens to have a girlfriend. Are you okay with that? And they were like, send me the first couple chapters. And I sent them the first chapters and they said, this is actually really cool. A blind detective. Yeah, here's a contract, finish the book. And in some ways we get so caught up in the idea of disability being less that maybe we are undercutting ourselves, because I put forward this, what I thought was a ridiculous idea. And the publisher was like, no, this is cool. Go, go, go. And part of it is finding the right audience and the right people to lift up and support you. So when it comes to telling those kinds of stories, once you get out of your own way, you start to realize, let me just start crafting that story. And if we're just talking about pure technical stuff, just to answer your question, Cameron, I tend to like a bulleted outline. It's like, here are 10 little bullets of the things that have to happen and in what order of the story. And then from there, I start filling in little sections by paragraph. And then what becomes 1 or 2 paragraphs becomes, this paragraph is chapter 1, this paragraph is chapter 2. And I have the sections, but I might write the beginning and then I'll flip over and I'll go, ooh, I'll look at number 10, bullet point 10. I'm going to write the whole ending because I have it in my head. And then I'll go back and maybe fill in sections here and there. And then it's going through and putting it as one whole story. When it comes to writing disability, I'm like, you know what? 1, there's plenty of research. 2, if you can't find any research, just pick up the phone and call somebody or send an email. The most powerful words in the world are saying, I'm a writer, right? You go to somebody and go, hey, I'm a writer. I would love to know about, poisons. And guess what? You can actually, people will answer you. Hey, I'm a writer. I'm doing this fantasy novel. Can you tell me about horses and long distance travel? And so when folks have said, hey, I want to write about disability, I said, go, you can Google and come up with a list of organizations that have something to do with disability and call them up or send an email going, I'm a writer. Do you have any folks with cerebral palsy? Because I want to make sure I don't screw this up. And there are actually several folks with disabilities who have taken on the role of sensitivity readers. And there are publishers who are hiring and requiring authors to use sensitivity readers. And I know that there's some folks have some contentiousness about it, but I actually think it's a good idea. If someone writes a book that involves a character with a specific identity that they do not own, they should probably make sure that it is not a horrible stereotype that they have written. And the fact that publishers are saying, you need to run this past a sensitivity reader, meaning it's somebody who reads the stuff is from that culture or has a disability, to basically confirm you aren't being horrible in how you write this in stereotypes and tropes. I think that's a good thing.
Sure. There's 2 more questions. I hope I can answer both. One would be from Khalud, which is, what advice would you give a person to overcome stereotypes that they may have?
I'm sorry, Khalud, you may have to be more specific on about yourself or that other people might have about you.
Others about you.
Oh, that's a tough one, actually. There's only so much we can do to control what others think. And let's be honest, there are folks who will not like, yes, there are people who are blatantly ableist and outright exclusionary. But what's horrible is more people take that slightly more charity model, or they do the poor thing, the pity model. And it's hard to break that. Honestly, the best thing, and this is the hardest actually, is to be yourself and have confidence in yourself to do your thing. If you have to, and I'm hoping people don't have to get confrontational, but usually part of it is by being yourself. I'm going to pause. I'm going to rewind. And I'm going to say, there was a study done several years ago, and it was around stigma and disability. And it was done in the UK. And they said, do you know what the number one way to get rid of stigma and stereotypes about people with disabilities is? To spend time with a person with disability. That was the number one way. So part of it is familiarity. A lot of the stereotypes exist because the only way people have heard about us is through the horrible movies and books and stereotypes over time. So part of it is by the confidence of being yourself around people helps to break some of that. And sometimes if you're just meeting people once, it's very hard to do that. And that's where, a sense of humor, being able to tell a good joke, to be casual can help make a difference. And I know that doesn't work for everyone. But I know that's a big way of doing it it does make a difference in the confidence in how you carry yourself And I say that I know with the privilege of age, because the age and the position, I'm in a position where I can do that. But I will say I certainly faked it a hell of a lot when I was younger, and it does work.
Right. Thank you. And also really great to know, because like I'm like a lot of us also in you like being young, we go through like similar things of like being able to question ourselves and like how like people perceive us, and like how like we could be able to like handle situations, specifically when like sometimes they might be a little bit tough. With that in mind, I want to thank our speaker today. We are very fortunate and very grateful for you to be here with us today. Like, it truly does mean a lot that you took time out of your hella busy schedule to be able to join us, because like I'm just very, like when I saw it, I'm like, oh snap, like completely involved practically in anything that someone can imagine. So like I am very grateful you took the time to be here with us today. I also want to take the time to thank our ASL interpreters as well as our captioner for being with us here today. It means a lot having y'all here. I also quickly wanted to say that we have a survey monkey that will be added. If you could just fill it out, it'll take about a minute or two just to let us know what you thought of the event. And I'll pass it to Cameron to talk a little bit about like our special giveaway.
Thank you, Jessica. So we're going to go ahead and draw 2 winners at random. And what we're drawing for is a chance for you to pick one item from our Yo store online. And the first winner is Nancy Yang. Nancy, congratulations. And then the second winner is Jamel Williams. And we will be emailing you, the Yo team will be emailing you to gather more information as far as like your mailing address. So that way we can get those items out to you, all right? But congratulations to Jamel and Nancy, and I'll turn it over to Jess to wrap up.
Yes. With that in mind, once again, thank you everyone for being here. Hope you could join us soon for our next speaker series. And once again, thank you to our speaker more than anything else for really taking the time to be here with us today. I hope y'all have the rest of a good week, and we'll hopefully talk to some of you very soon. So yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you.